From broke to unstoppable. Jim Rohn Motivation.
On the run.
Let me tell you something that most people never want to hear. Broke is not a bank account. Broke is a mindset that has not been rebuilt yet. And if you do not rebuild it, you can win the lottery tomorrow and still be broke again in 5 years. Because the money was never the problem. The thinking was the problem. There was a man who understood this better than almost anyone who ever stood on a stage. He grew up poor on a small farm in Idaho. The only child his parents had, and by the time he was 25 years old he was married. He had a child of his own, and he did not have enough money to take care of either of them. He was not lazy. He was not stupid. He had left college after a single year because it did not seem to be teaching him anything about the life he actually wanted. He took a steady job in personnel at Sears, the kind of job people call safe. And still, at 25, he was going nowhere. His name was Jim Rohn. And before this video is finished, you are going to understand exactly how a broke 25-year-old with a wife, a baby and no plan, became one of the most influential voices in personal development that this country has ever produced. But here is the part I want you to sit with before we go any further. What if the reason you are still stuck right now has nothing to do with your bank account, your background, or your bad luck? What if it has everything to do with the 5 people you have been standing next to? What if the version of you that is broke right now is only broke because nobody ever handed you the one philosophy that changes everything? Keep that question in your mind. We are coming back to it. 25 is a strange age to be desperate. You are old enough to have responsibilities, and young enough to still believe things will somehow work themselves out. Jim Rohn was living in that strange middle place. He had a family depending on him, and a job that paid him just enough to survive, and never enough to breathe. He told himself the story that a lot of us tell ourselves. Next year will be different. Once things settle down, I will start saving. Once I get a raise, I will figure out the rest. And the years kept passing the way years do, quietly, without asking permission, without announcing themselves. He was not choosing to fail. He simply had never been shown what winning actually required. Then something happened that did not look important at the time. A friend invited him to go listen to a man named Earl Shoaff give a talk. Rohn almost did not go. How many times in your own life has the thing that changed everything arrived disguised as something ordinary? A conversation you almost skipped. A video you almost scrolled past. An invitation you almost said no to. Shoaff was a successful entrepreneur. And when Rohn sat in that room and listened to him speak, something in him recognized that this man had access to a way of thinking he had never been taught. Not a trick, not a shortcut, a different relationship with effort, with time, and with himself. Rohn joined the company Shoaff was building. First with a business called Abunda Vita in 1955. And then 2 years later with NutriBio, when Shoaff and his partners started that company from the ground up. And this is where the story could have gone the way most stories go. Rohn could have joined, worked half-heartedly, quit when it got difficult, and gone back to telling himself that next year would be different. Instead, something in him decided that this time was going to be the last time he negotiated with his own potential. Shoaff became his mentor. And mentorship from a man like that is not gentle. It does not sound like encouragement. It sounds like someone refusing to let you lie to yourself anymore. Rohn began to absorb a way of operating that had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with daily decisions nobody else could see. He started reading. He started setting goals with actual deadlines instead of vague hopes. He started treating his own development as seriously as he treated his job, if not more seriously. And here is the phrase that became the center of everything he later taught the world. Work harder on yourself than you do on your job. Not instead of your job. Harder than your job. Because your job will only ever pay you what the job is worth. But you, the version of you that keeps growing, that is the asset with no ceiling. Think about what that actually means for a moment. Most people spend 8 hours a day building somebody else's dream, and 0 hours a day building their own mind. They go to work, they do what is required, they come home, and they consume something that asks nothing of them until they fall asleep. Then they wonder why 5 years later they are standing in the exact same place. Rohn flipped that equation. He gave his job what it required, and then he gave himself what he required. The discipline of showing up for his own growth every single day, whether he felt like it or not, whether he saw results yet or not, whether anyone was watching or not. Under Shoaff's mentorship, Rohn rose quickly. By 1960, the company had expanded into Canada, and Rohn was put in charge of that entire operation. A man who 5 years earlier could not support his own family was now leading an organization across a border. And by the time he was 30 years old, Jim Rohn was a millionaire. Now I want you to notice something, because this is where most motivational stories stop, and it is exactly where the real lesson begins. A millionaire at 30. If the story ended there, it would be a nice story. It would not be a useful one. Because 3 years later, at 33, Jim Rohn went broke. Say that out loud to yourself. He built it. He proved he could do it once, and then he lost it. Not because he got unlucky. Not because the world turned on him. The company ran into serious trouble. Decisions were made that he did not fully control, and the fortune he had built came apart. If you have ever built something, whether it was money, a relationship, a body, a business, and watched it fall apart despite your effort, I want you to know that the man this entire video is about lived through exactly that at 33 years old. Here is the question that separates the people who stay down from the people who become legends. What do you do the day after everything falls apart? Rohn did not go back to blaming his circumstances the way he had at 25. He could not, because he already knew the truth. He had already proven with his own hands that discipline works. He had already felt what it was like to build something out of nothing using nothing but daily decisions. So going broke at 33 did not destroy his belief in the philosophy. It only proved that the philosophy had to become permanent, not temporary. He had built a fortune once by working on himself daily. So he did it again. Jim Rohn used to say, there are 2 types of pain you will go through in life. The pain of discipline and the pain of regret. And discipline weighs ounces while regret weighs tons. Sit with that. The tiredness you feel from waking up early and doing the work weighs almost nothing compared to the weight of looking back in 10 years knowing you had it in you and never used it. He was not talking in theory when he said that. He had felt both kinds of pain by the time he was 33 years old. And he chose, over and over, the lighter one. While he was rebuilding his life a second time, something unplanned happened that ended up mattering more than the money ever did. Rohn had moved to Beverly Hills, and in 1963 a friend from a local Rotary Club asked him to come speak about his own story. Not a keynote, not a paid event, a favor for a friend. He stood up and told a room full of strangers about a farm kid from Idaho who nearly stayed broke his whole life until he decided to change the one thing he actually had control over, himself. That room responded to him, and more invitations followed. What began as a favor turned into a second career that Rohn had never planned for and could not have predicted. A career built entirely on telling the truth about what he had lived through. He was not selling a fantasy. He had gone broke in front of people. He had rebuilt in front of people. And that honesty is exactly what made people trust him. 2 years after that first talk, in 1965, Earl Shoaff died. The man who had pulled Rohn out of a life of quiet desperation was gone. Rohn did not have his mentor standing beside him anymore, correcting him, pushing him, refusing to let him settle. He had to become his own source of discipline from that point forward, which is the test every single person eventually faces. Your mentors, your parents, your best influences, none of them stay forever. At some point the accountability has to move from outside of you to inside of you, or it disappears the moment the person holding you accountable is no longer in the room. Rohn passed that test. He kept building. He kept speaking. He kept refining the philosophy that had already rescued him twice, once from being 25 and broke, and once from being 33 and broke again. Over the following decades he delivered his message to audiences all over the world, and the people who sat in those seats went on to shape the entire personal development industry that exists today. A young Tony Robbins learned from him directly in the late 1970s. Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen, who later created the Chicken Soup for the Soul series, credited him with shaping their thinking. Brian Tracy did too. Mark Hughes, who went on to found Herbalife, was mentored by him as well. One broke farm kid from Idaho ended up quietly influencing an entire generation of people, who then influenced millions more. He wrote it all down eventually, in books like 7 Strategies for Wealth and Happiness and The Art of Exceptional Living, so that the philosophy would not disappear when he did. And in 1985 the National Speakers Association recognized him for excellence in speaking, an honor that does not get handed to people who got lucky once. It gets handed to people who kept proving the same principle for decades until nobody could deny it anymore. Now let's slow down, because I did not tell you all of that so you could admire a man who has been gone since 2009. I told you all of that so you could see something uncomfortable and useful at the same time. Broke is not permanent unless you decide it is. Jim Rohn was broke at 25 with a family to feed. He built a fortune by 30. He lost every bit of it by 33. And he built it back again, because somewhere along the way he had stopped believing his bank account was the truth about him, and started believing his daily discipline was the truth about him. The money was only ever a lagging indicator of the thinking underneath it. So here is the real question. What is your version of being 25 and broke right now? Maybe it is not money at all. Maybe it is a body you do not respect. Maybe it is a relationship with yourself built entirely out of broken promises. Maybe it is a dream you have been talking about for years while doing nothing about it. Whatever it is, the philosophy does not change based on what your particular version of broke looks like. Rohn taught that formal education will make you a living, but self-education will make you a fortune. Read that again. Your job, your degree, your resume, all of that has a ceiling. It will pay you exactly what the market says that role is worth, and not a cent more. But what you learn on your own time, the books you read after work when nobody is checking on you, the skills you build in the hours other people spend scrolling, that has no ceiling at all. Rohn used to point out something simple and brutal at the same time. Successful people have libraries. The rest have big screen televisions. That is not an insult. It is a description of where two different futures come from. He also taught that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Not the 5 people you admire from a distance. The 5 people whose energy you actually absorb every single day. If those 5 people complain more than they build, you will start to complain more than you build. If those 5 people treat discipline like punishment, you will start to treat it the same way. This is not about abandoning people you love. It is about being honest with yourself about what you are absorbing, and deciding on purpose to spend more time around the version of thinking you actually want to catch. And here is the part that most people skip past, because it is the least exciting part of the whole philosophy. Motivation is what gets you started. Habit is what keeps you going. You do not need to feel inspired every single morning. Inspiration is a spark, not a fuel source. Rohn was not thinking about greatness every single day he woke up early to work on himself. Some mornings he almost certainly did not feel like it at all. He did it anyway, because he had already decided in advance, on a day when he did feel like it, that this was who he was choosing to become. That decision, made once, and then honored daily, is worth more than 1,000 motivational mornings that never turn into action. Think back to the 2 versions of Jim Rohn we just walked through. The 25-year-old who was drowning quietly and telling himself next year would be different. And the 33-year-old who lost everything and rebuilt it without complaint. Same man. Completely different relationship with himself. The circumstances at 25 and the circumstances at 33 were both difficult. What changed in between them was not luck. It was the daily practice of discipline, is the bridge between goals and accomplishment. A line he said so often because he had lived the truth of it twice. I want you to notice that nowhere in this story did the world suddenly become fair to him. Nobody handed him a shortcut. His mentor died. His fortune collapsed once. He had every excuse available to stay bitter and stay broke. And instead he kept asking the only question that actually moves a life forward. Not why is this happening to me, but what is this here to build in me? That single shift in the question you ask yourself is the difference between a life that happens to you and a life you build on purpose. So let's bring this back to you. Because a story about a man who has been gone for over 15 years is worthless to you unless you take something out of it and use it today. What have you been telling yourself will be different next year without actually changing what you do this week? What 5 people have you been standing closest to? And what are you absorbing from them without even noticing? What is the 1 hour a day you are currently giving to something that asks nothing of you? That could instead be given to a book, a skill, a version of yourself that is still waiting to exist. Because here is the truth Rohn proved with his own life, not once, but twice. Broke is not a life sentence. It is a starting position. The farm kid from Idaho who could not support his own family at 25 did not stay that person. And neither did the man who lost his fortune at 33. Both times, the way out was the same. Not a lucky break, not a rescue from outside. A decision to work harder on himself than he worked on anything else, made quietly, repeated daily, for years, until the outside world finally caught up with what had already changed on the inside. You already know what your version of that decision looks like. You have known for a while. The only question left is whether today is the day you stop negotiating with it. If this gave you something to think about, that is exactly what it was meant to do. There is more of this philosophy waiting in the next video. So stay close, because the story of how someone rebuilds after losing everything is never really about the money. It is about who they had already become underneath it. And that part, nobody can take from you once you have built it.